I would like to now hand this over to Danielle Gallant, who will speak for about 10 minutes. And then Sophia Mathur and Alex will come up here and talk a bit. And they're going, Danielle Gallant is from EcoJustice, and EcoJustice is the Canada's largest environmental lawsuit organization. And Danielle, I've got to know her over the last 3.5 years in the case that she's been doing, and she's been a lawyer with EcoJustice since 2018. So without any further ado, Danielle, please introduce yourself a little bit better if you wish, and then please take over.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Kathy, for the kind introduction and also for asking me to come and speak today on this panel. It's great to see people from all over Ontario, maybe even all over the country. So wonderful to be speaking to you all today. As for myself, as Kathy mentioned, I'm a staff lawyer at EcoJustice in the Ottawa office. So I am also here on the traditional and unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people today. And in terms of EcoJustice, as Kathy also mentioned, we're Canada's largest environmental law charity in the sense that our offices span the country from Vancouver to Halifax. And we use the power of the law to defend nature, to combat the climate crisis, and to fight for a healthy environment for all. And particularly today, I'm here to talk to you about a case that's very close to my heart. It's one that I've been working on for some years now as a lawyer. And I think it's a very exciting case. And if you haven't heard about it yet, I'm hoping that now you'll know about it and hopefully you'll tell others. So I'll just quickly share my screen. And just an invitation. Okay, great. I'm seeing thumbs up that you can see my screen. Hopefully nothing else than just my PowerPoint. Not my many tabs that are open, but I also wanted to invite those who feel comfortable to turn on their camera, just so that I feel like I'm speaking to real human beings today. That would be wonderful. Otherwise, no problem. I understand it's a Sunday. So as I mentioned, here to talk about the Mathur et al. Versus Her Majesty and Right of Ontario case. You can see here a picture of the wonderful applicants. This was right at the very start of the case, but we now have some updated pictures, which I hope will be part of my PowerPoints going forward, because we recently had the opportunity to all meet again in person after quite some time during the pandemic. Are you seeing my next slide? Can I confirm? Great. All right. So in terms of what this case is actually about, so it's an application that's been brought by 7 youth, the 7 youths you saw in the picture that I showed before. At the time that we launched the case, they were 12 to 24 years old. They're now a little bit older, and they're from across the province of Ontario. So Sophia's in Sudbury, for instance, Alex is in Ottawa. So we have really applicants that are from throughout the province and have kind of different life experiences, different backgrounds, but who all really care about the issue of climate change and are really concerned for their future. And it's important to note that this case is not only about current Ontario youth, it's on behalf of all current Ontario youth, but also future generations. And so the applicants here have what's called public interest standing. So they're not bringing the case on behalf of themselves, they're bringing it on behalf of all Ontario youth and future generations. And this case is against the government of Ontario. There have been several other similar lawsuits launched against the federal government, so that's an important distinction. And really what this case is about is the fact that the Ontario government repealed its previous GHG emissions reduction targets that were set in the Climate Change Mitigation and Low Carbon Economy Act. And those targets used to be for 2020, 2030, and 2050, and were fairly ambitious. The Ontario government then repealed those targets and replaced them with only one target that is woefully inadequate for 2030. And that was repealed by the Cap and Trade Cancellation Act in 2018. And this new act was set pursuant to that law, and then articulated further in the Made in Ontario Environment Plan. And it's 30% below 2005 levels by 2030. So we say this is woefully inadequate in light of the science, in light of the understanding of what's a safe level of warming. So that's really what caused this whole lawsuit to occur. The legal basis for this case are arguments based on the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. So Section 7 of the Charter, the right to life, liberty, and security of the person, one of the most important or central rights that we have. Section 15, the right to equality under the law. So for instance, you cannot discriminate based on age. And so youth being more at risk of climate harms does not respect the right to equality under the law. And finally, what we've also put forward this kind of legalese argument that's an unwritten constitutional principles, but essentially boils down to the fact that governments cannot engage in conduct that will result in mass harms of their citizens. That seems to be fairly intuitive, but we've had to argue it in this case because that's from our perspective, the government is not respecting that principle. And the harms that are being claimed in this case are future harms because they're related to the 2030 target. They'd be harms that would occur in the future to both young Ontarians and future generations that are not yet born. And those harms include things like extreme heat, wildfires, flooding, infectious disease, algal blooms, and toxic contamination, which affect food and water supplies, and mental health impacts. And all of these harms have implications for the health, mortality, and fundamental decisions that our youth and future generations will be making. And finally, all of those impacts will have particular emphasis on youth, since children and youth are more vulnerable to certain harms for various reasons, but also because these harms are going to get worse over time. And so they will occur more intensively during youth and future generations' lives. And also particular impacts on Indigenous peoples who are at the front lines of climate change and other vulnerable populations and marginalized communities who will be harder hit by climate change than anyone else. I won't get too far into these because there's quite a little bit of legalese in this language, but essentially what we want from this lawsuit, what we're seeking, is a declaration that when Ontario did all those things that I described and set its new inadequate target, it violated Ontario and future generations' rights under Section 7 and 15 of the Charter and that principle I mentioned. And also that within the rights to life, liberty, and security of the person, there is a right to a stable climate system that's capable of providing youth and future generations with a sustainable future. It seems fairly logical to me that that is a basis of the right to life. And so we're seeking to establish that in this case. And finally, we're hoping to the court will order Ontario to set a science-based target consistent with its share to, apologies for the typo, the share of emissions reduction that is needed to limit global warming below 1.5 degrees. And finally, order that Ontario revise its climate plan in line with that new target. So what's happened in this case so far? We launched this case in, I believe, November of 2019. So it's been a number of years now. In 2020, Ontario filed what's called a motion to strike. So they were essentially trying to say that this case had no chance of success whatsoever. And so the court should just not hear it and it should not proceed any further. There was a hearing back in July and a decision in November 2020. Thankfully for us, Justice Brown agreed that our case should move forward. She rejected all of Ontario's arguments and found that, for instance, Ontario's target and plan were reviewable by the courts. They were not merely these political questions that courts could not make decisions on. The fact that the claims were capable of scientific proof, that was one of the arguments that Ontario brought, that these were speculative harms. There was no way to prove they were going to happen. So she rejected that. The fact that these were novel claims, so they're claims that the court is not used to seeing, the court does not decide on climate change issues every day, does not mean that it should not advance to a hearing. And the fact that it might involve positive rights, so the fact that it might involve an obligation for the government to act rather than when it acts in a way that fails to protect rights, does not mean it should be struck. And very importantly, that the applicants have standing, at least at this stage, to bring this case on behalf of future generations, which is a very important question. If we can't bring these cases on behalf of future generations and we have to wait until they are already in this world, well, it might be too late to bring these types of cases and protect them. And just this great quote at the end that this case is of public interest in that it transcends the interests of all Ontario residents, not just the applicant's generation or the ones that follow. So really recognizing that this is a case that's being brought in the public interest. So what's next for our case? Just a quick update that Ontario did seek leave to appeal that decision. That appeal was denied. So that essentially confirmed that this will be the first charter-based climate case in Canada to survive a preliminary challenge or hurdle like this and move on to a hearing. And so I'm seeing some cheers. Yeah, I agree. This case is moving forward to a hearing on the merits. So on the full case itself, on the evidence that we've put forward. So this is the first time that a court in Canada will be weighing this type of evidence of climate change. So it's very, very exciting. And that's happening in September 12th to 14th, 2022. And really just emphasizing that this case is historic. Whatever decision comes down from the court will have a lot of influence on what happens next in terms of how courts deal with climate litigation. So no pressure on us, but it is kind of a big deal. So I'm glad to be informing you of that today. I think that was my last slide, but I did want to conclude on the fact, because I know this question will come up, what can be done to support this case and to support the Great Seven youth who are leading the case. First of all, you can sign up to our eco-justice newsletters, because you can be sure that we will be communicating about this case a lot in the next 6 months. So that's a good way to keep on top of the information. Whenever you receive those communications, and especially things coming from the youth themselves, please amplify their voices. It's important that people know about this case and know about the youth bringing this case. You can also add your name to a statement that we will be submitting to the court in order to support the fact that this case is in the public interest. And so showing how many people agree with that statement. And I can put the link to that in the chat after this. And finally, just if you have the means, consider supporting us by donating to this work to ensure that it can continue to go forward. So with that, I don't know if I went past my time, but I'll leave it to Sophia and I believe Alex, two of our really great applicants in the case, and they inspire me a lot. So I hope that they will inspire you too. Thank you.
I'm a little shorter than the person who was sitting here before me, so just making sure to adjust. Thanks so much, Danielle. That was great, and it was great to see you back in March when we got together. As Danielle mentioned, we had the opportunity, all the applicants and our legal team at EcoJustice and the rest of the EcoJustice team, to get together in March. So that was really, really inspiring. And I think that's the thing that I take away from being involved in this case the most is I feel like we're going to win. You know what I mean? Not just the case, but against climate change. I feel like we really, when we get together and we work together, we can succeed, and taking action in whatever way for me breeds hope, whereas inaction breeds despair. So that's what I'd say to anybody who, you know, isn't involved in the case, but wants to be involved in something similar. Is like, what can I do about climate change? This is such an overwhelming problem. Get involved and do something. Link up with a group who has similar views to you and wants to do something, because that's how we move things forward and get things done. I would say probably the other thing that I've taken away the most from being involved in this case in the past few years that we've been working on it, it's hard to believe that it's been, what, 2-3 years already? That's wild. The other thing that I've really taken away from it is the importance of focus. Anything you do is going to have detractors, unfortunately. And I remember seeing on social media just like comments that seemed totally strange to me, like, oh, why are you suing the provincial government? You should sue the federal government instead, and things like that. And it's like, you know what, I'd love to sue the federal government, that'd be fun, but you can't sue everyone. You have to really stay focused and on your goals and allocating your resources in one place. And you know, all the cases that have come against the federal government so far, as Danielle said, none of them have succeeded in getting over preliminary legal hurdles. Ours is the only one who has. So I think we're pretty smart, just saying. But yeah, that's the importance of focus, and then ignoring the haters and just keeping on going. And that's how I feel about being involved, not just with the case, but with CCL too. Some people, people will be interested in signing up for the CCL chapter, and then they're like, oh, never mind, it's not for me. Or why are you only focusing on carbon pricing? Why do you do this? Why do you do that? And I think really just staying focused on your goals, not getting distracted, not taking off more than you can chew is, for me, one of the biggest takeaways that being involved in this case really helped me to think about and to apply to my work with CCL. So yeah, those are my takeaways. Happy to chat with anybody afterwards, virtually or in person, if you are in person, about other things that I've learned from the case. Ways you can support. Danielle's already given some good ways. Just sharing on social media and being positive too is something that I would really appreciate. So yeah, thanks so much. I'll turn it over to Sophia now.
Okay. Hello. Oh, okay. Hi, my name is Sophia. I'm Kathy's daughter, and I've been involved in CCL since I was 7 years old. And this all started one day when my mom decided she was going lobbying on Parliament Hill, like she would every year. And usually my dad and I would go to a museum or a zoo or something. But this one year I was like, I want to see what my mom's job is like, because to me, climate change was her job. It wasn't something that was going to affect my future. So I decided to, oh, okay. Sorry, I didn't realize I was too far away from the mic. So I decided to go in with her on Parliament Hill. Since I was only 7, I couldn't really talk to the politicians and tell them too much about climate change, but I knew this was a serious issue because in my household, we always discussed climate change and talked about it. So I would draw pictures for the politicians. At the end of every meeting, I would give them a little drawing that I drew that would say something like, a carbon tax is a perfect solution with a little cat on it or something like that. And then in 2018, I decided to go lobbying again, but this time with my friends, Maggie, who is sitting over there. I know those online can't see her, but everyone in person can. And my friend Salma, who isn't here today. And we decided to talk to the politicians this time. Instead of me drawing photos, we actually got to discuss with them. And I realized that the politicians are actually willing to listen to youth. I always thought that climate change was something that adults should be taking action on. But now I realize that politicians are willing to listen to youth. So that's when I started my own personal activism, getting involved in Fridays for Future with Greta Thunberg. And then later on in the lawsuit that Danielle and Alex were talking about. I've realized throughout all my years of activism that it's important that youth speak out about this. No matter what age you are, this is going to affect us all, but especially youth. So yeah, that's pretty much all I wanted to say. And I'm also really happy for the adults here today that you guys are stepping up for our future. And I'm really happy that everyone's here today because this is our future. We are the generation of climate action and we should all be working together. So thank you so much. I didn't have something super prepared, but yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So let's just say we'll go to questions in a moment.
Oh yeah, if you want any questions, we'll go to that in a moment.
You and Alex can sit side by side and share the mic back and forth.
Oh yeah, so if you have any questions for me, Alex,
Or Danielle.
We'll be here to answer them. And it could be questions from anyone in person as well.
Okay. So
I do see a couple in the chat. Should I read them out loud and then we can respond?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Great. So the first question comes from Tom and asking, what are the possible outcomes in September and what happens next? So maybe I can just start us off from my perspective. The hearing in September, I am willing to bet money that there will not be a decision from the bench straight away. The court is going to want to take a bit of time to think about all this before rendering their decision. So, September will be a really exciting time, but we won't have a decision at that time. So likely a few months later, depends how quickly they work on this, we will have a decision either way. And obviously we would have to consider if we, for instance, were not successful, if we wanted to appeal. But in these types of cases, just given the importance of the issues, they're very likely to be appealed by either side. And we're anticipating that it's very possible that this case will go all the way to the Supreme Court. So that, the highest court in the land in terms of the colonial settler court system will hear these questions. So that is what I anticipate, but obviously it all depends what happens after our hearing in September. Any other thoughts, Alex and Sophia?
Go for it.
I was just about to say that you worded that perfectly, so I don't have anything else to add.
I guess regardless of what happens, I think it's really exciting that I feel like we've already kicked open the door for other people who want to come after us to do this kind of thing in terms of just the getting a positive decision on the motion to strike. I have friends in law school who are like, oh, people are going to be learning about this in school. So yeah, I think regardless of what happens, we've already made history.
I agree. It's great. So I see another question. So besides ordering a better target and plan, could the court order more concrete action like removing fossil fuel subsidies or pricing climate pollution? The answer to that is not likely, just because courts do not like to step in and tell government what to do. They're very wary of their role in democracy. So the remedies, the things that we're seeking in this case are very carefully worded to try to ensure the court doesn't feel like they're overstepping their boundaries. So courts feel comfortable, declaring that government action violated the charter, for instance, but we're not seeking to tell the court that they should order government to exactly what they should do. We're seeking them to order Ontario to set a better target and a plan to achieve it. But the idea is that Ontario would have the latitude to decide how to achieve that target. Now, I'm sure everyone in this room understands the difference between efficient and non-efficient policy. And so likely Ontario would want to put forward efficient policy, whether or not that would include pricing pollution. So that's my answer on that. Just there is a limit to what you can seek in these types of cases. And sometimes when too much has been asked, courts have then become very nervous and not wanted to step into what they view as kind of a political question, a policy question that governments should be allowed to decide on. So that's why there's kind of parameters to what we're seeking.
There's a question here in person. How are we going to do that? Do you want to come to the mic and ask the question?
So hello, my name is Yo Ricardo. I was just wondering if you had like one law you could implement that will ease the climate application, what will it be?
That's a very good question, and I like it very much. I think for me, and maybe I'd have a different answer if I was working on a different case, but I would just love there to be a recognition that climate harms violates charter rights. If I had a magic wand and could make any change, I think I would include in the Constitution a right to a stable climate, because I think that would really help us in these types of cases to show that when government acts in a way that is very harmful, that then violates our constitutionally protected rights. So thanks for that question. I would ask the same to Alex and Sophia though, because they might have different thoughts.
Honestly, I would probably say the same, to be honest. I feel like the government needs to acknowledge that anything that harms our climate harms our rights.
I feel like the closest thing to a law that I would want to implement already does exist. The Climate Accountability Act, which I know CCL worked hard lobbying about, is very imperfect. And I think there is a review of it coming up in a few years. So I think we should be active about pushing the government to change it in a positive way when that review does come around. But I think that was a big step forward, the fact that we got one at all. So that's my answer to that question.
Great. I'm seeing a few more in the chat. There's a question about whether there's any risks of using an unwritten constitutional principle in this case. From my perspective, not necessarily risks, but it is a novel argument. It's one that hasn't been advanced before. So whenever you're bringing an argument like that, there's no guarantee that a court will agree with it and apply it. But I think it's important to put forward these types of arguments in this type of case, because it is a case that's unlike any other. Climate change is a situation like no other. So I think we need legal arguments to match the importance and novelty of these issues. So great question. There's another quick case question that was asked directly to me. Is this the typical pace for these kinds of cases? I'd say yes, in the sense that it's fairly expected that a case like this will go through some kind of challenge from government so that they don't have to go through to a hearing. They want to avoid that for, I think, obvious reasons. So I think it's fairly normal that we went through that process. And so I'd say we're advancing fairly quickly. I know it seems slow from an activist perspective. Litigation is slow, and I think it's one of the downsides to taking this type of approach. I think it's important to acknowledge that litigation is not the answer to everything, given in particular to how slowly it moves. But once a decision is rendered, I think it can have really far-reaching impacts. So I'd say it is a typical pace for this case, even though we did launch it back in 2019. There's a good question about whether there could be gatherings at the court. I would encourage you, if you're in Toronto, if you want to travel to Toronto during those dates, to come and support us. Court hearings are open to the public. I don't know to what degree there will be space to hold everyone who wants to come and support. I know in some cases, like the carbon pricing reference cases, sometimes they opened up secondary hearing rooms so that everyone could listen in. And hopefully they'll also create a live stream so that people throughout the country, throughout the world, can listen in, because I think it's an important case that people will want to listen in on, even if they don't have the means or ability to be in Toronto during those dates. Oh, I see Len has raised a hand. Oh, you're still muted.
I'll unmute him. Here you go. You have the ability to unmute. We can't hear you, Len. He is unmuted. Do you think it's possible you could maybe type your question in the chat?
Yeah, sorry, we're not hearing you, unfortunately. I think there's a technical issue. So if you wanted to write it in the chat, then we can address it. In the meantime, there's a really great question that I knew would come up. If the government changes after the upcoming election, will there be any effect on this case? The answer is not necessarily. This case is not brought against Ford alone. It's brought against the Ontario government and any government that, would similarly backslide on their target and put their citizens at harm. So I would say not necessarily. Now, the government at any time could change their target, and that could potentially change how we're bringing our case and whether we want to continue this case. But I think we would just have to adapt if that happened, and we'd have to discuss it with all the applicants to see if they wanted to continue with the case. So I'd say it's not government specific, it's target specific.
This is probably the last question, the next one. Oh, sorry, I thought there was a question from Len. Do we have any more questions in person? Oh, we have one over here.
Hi, question about if this case is successful, does it set a legal precedent to bring forward other cases in other provinces, or even on issues that are a bit broader, such as like in British Columbia, where I'm from, there's a lot of government support for liquid natural gas development and deforestation.
Yep, excellent question. I would say if this case is successful and the court sets the precedent that, when a government, as Ontario has done here, has taken action that causes GHG emissions to be emitted and climate change to ensue and harms to ensue, that violates charter rights, I think that will be an important precedent that can be used in other jurisdictions in Canada. All provinces and the federal government are all bound by the charter, so they all could similarly be sued on a similar basis. So I think it would be a very important precedent that courts throughout the country would then be aware of and apply. As to the question of whether it would apply to other circumstances like LNG or fossil fuel subsidies more broadly, I think that might be a broader question about there's issues of causation. So how much the government's actions are related to the quantity of GHG emissions and how they would cause climate change. But I would like to see courts acknowledge that, even at a lower level of GHG emissions, that still causes harm. We know that every GHG emitted causes harm. And so I hope also that that's something that can be established here, so that in other cases involving other types of state actions, approving a project, for instance, that could be considered by the court as well.
I think that's the last question we can take because of the timing. But thank you so much. I know there's definitely more questions in the chat. And unless Danielle has any more questions, she think she can answer? Yeah.
There are some really great questions in the chat. I'm sorry that we've run out of time. Just quickly, because I know Len was asking the question in the chat. There are other cases in Canada, and I want to highlight them because I think it's important that these cases are being brought in different jurisdictions on different things. So there's the LaRose case being brought by another group of youth against the federal government. They unfortunately were unsuccessful in a motion to strike, but they're appealing that to the Federal Court of Appeal. So I hope everyone can also support them in their appeal. Environnement Jeunesse, a class action brought by youth from the government, from the province of Quebec, again against the federal government. Similarly failed at kind of a preliminary level. That might go to the Supreme Court. So again, something to support those youth's rights to bring their case. And another case, which is not youth-led, which is called Midziyik, which is brought by heads of Wet'suwet'en families. So this case argues not only things like Section 7 and 15, but Section 35 rights, Indigenous rights. So a very important case, which I believe, unfortunately, they also were struck out initially, but I think their case is being heard at the same time as LaRose. So please also follow what's happening in those cases and support wherever you can, because obviously Ontario is not the only government in Canada to be backsliding on climate action or taking insufficient action. So important to highlight those other jurisdictions as well. So I think I won't take any more time, but if anyone wants to, get in touch, if anyone has any questions, please feel free to, and I'll answer them to the degree I can.
Thanks so much, Danielle, for joining us. It's been really great. And even though I've heard this a bunch before, it always makes me happy to hear about the case again. So thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Run out ahead of that. It's a great idea. Any other questions? Okay, just so you know, 14 more signatures happened. Letters were sent to MPs for the anesthetic gases. That's great. So good work, everyone. It's a super wonky ask. It's not like we're, being against something. We're being something so specific. We're being for something. It's so hard to be for something that is so specific. So getting these letters really does make a difference. And it's also being pinged to the Minister of Environment and Climate Change and the Minister of Health. So they're getting them as well, not just your own MP. And there's also a French version as well. So I think I would like to wind up now. And my goodness, we can end 5 minutes early. That's really awesome. First of all, thank you everyone for being here today. We'll be back tomorrow. The room will open at 11:15. No, the room will open at 11 and it will start at 11:15 sharp, because Mark Reynolds is on the call and he does everything sharp. I'm not allowed to be relaxed about it. We're going to be very formal tomorrow on time. We're going to have opening comments from Mark Reynolds. And then Darren Qualman from the National Farmers Union is going to give us a beautiful perspective on like all the how the world is out of balance and how if we closed a few loops, we could really rebalance this earth. And he gives it from a farmer's perspective. I like the energy systems and everything. I don't know how else to explain it, but it's a grand overview of where we should be going. And he's a brilliant human being and a farmer, and just so honored to have him talk with us tomorrow. And then our colleagues, Kwame, Gloria Bullis, Precious Columba, and David Michael Turungwa are just going to tell you what it's like to be in Africa right now, and why our work in Canada means so much to them. And so you'll be carrying their voices to your MPs. And then lastly, Michael Bernstein is going to be our carbon pricing guru. You can throw everything at him. He's our policy wonk. We've got those really deep carbon pricing questions. And then just planning next steps for lobbying your MP in May. If you haven't done so already, please do invite your parliamentarians to join us when we build a dream catcher on Parliament Hill on Tuesday morning. I'm so excited for that. If you haven't done so already, but you're free to go now. I'll stay here for a couple more minutes. Love you all. Thank you for being here. I look forward to seeing y'all tomorrow.
All right, thanks, Kathy. Bye.
Thank you.